The Committee of the Whole, May 28th Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Okay. In the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we acknowledge the town of Edson is located on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Nikawa, Saulteaux, Passamaquoddy, Canine, Dene, Nakota Sioux, and the Wispy and Métis Nations. We honor and acknowledge this land, the elders and youth which gathered here for our ancestors, gathered here for centuries. Then I'll call for an adoption of the agenda with an addition of a closed session. Okay, with the agenda, May 28th. Okay, no, it's not up there yet. I'm calling with an addition of a closed session, town manager update, FOIT, section 24, advise from officials. And with that said, I will call for a motion for adoption of the agenda. That ain't working. There you go, Councillor Moore. Go ahead, Councillor Moore. Ah, now you're live. Go ahead, Councillor Moore.
I so move.
Okay, all those in favor? Carried. Okay, we'll move on to adoption of the previous minutes of May 14th, 2024. Okay. Oh, you're not coming up.
I move that the minutes of the May 14th, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting be adopted as presented.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Taylor. All those in favor? Carried. And then we're moving on to... Okay, we got no delegations, reports. We're going down to E3 Corporate Services, Faculty Life Assessment Reports. And that would be who presenting? Sorry? Jerry Little. So, okay, go ahead. Oh, you're the gentleman I had earlier. Go ahead.
Deputy Mayor, I'd like to introduce Jerry Little. For those of you who've not met Jerry, he's our new Facilities and Energy Manager, and I'm going to hand over tonight's presentation on the Facility Life Cycle Assessment Reporting, and he'll introduce our consultants. Again, we did have a chance to go through the initial building condition assessments on May 14th. Jerry?
Yeah, thank you for all being here. As you remember, 2 weeks ago, during the last Committee of the Whole, Salas O'Brien presented the building condition assessment. And today we're going to cover, or they're going to cover off on five more facilities. So the gentleman that'll be presenting is Lawrence McSorley. And take it away, Steve.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Larry McSorley from Salas O'Brien here in Calgary. So as he mentioned, we're going to go through the second set of reports that we went through. Is everybody able to see my screen? I just wanted to make sure.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. All right. So just to kind of recap what we were doing in this project, we looked at the facility life cycle assessments for your portfolio buildings for the next 20 years. We looked at architectural, site, structural, mechanical, electrical pieces. We considered what was needed to be repaired, life cycle replacements, and then any other outstanding maintenance items. And we also considered some changes that were in the code and issues such as accessibility for the buildings. We did all these site visits last July. We kind of did on-site interviews with staff, and then we basically documented the existing conditions by reviewing site conditions and took a lot of notes and photography. So the 5 buildings we're looking at today are your Griffiths Park Center, which is about 44 years old and 6,000 square feet. Edson Civic Center, 67 years old and about 10,000 square feet. And the District Fire Hall, which is 40 years old, 11,674. Galway Station, which has a historic portion to it and then a newer section of it. So the newer section is the 13 years, and then the public works, which is 47 years and one of your bigger buildings. Noting that the addition that was put on the one end is a little newer. So each facility has its own unique maintenance and capital needs. So that's kind of the point of doing each one individually. When you're looking at something over 20 years, quite a few life cycle replacement items come up. That's normal. Sometimes some elements can happen twice, such as painting or carpeting. They might wear out twice during a 20-year period of time. This is a quick recap of the 5 buildings. Not a ton of immediate items, which are items that we consider critical that would have to happen in the next 6 months that are related to either life safety and sometimes it's kind of some additional studies that we're recommending to do further investigation. The short term for these 5 buildings rather, is about 4.4 million. The long term is 8.4 million, with one of the public works building kind of taking a larger share of the overall spread there, almost a 3-to-1 ratio there with that building. Keep in mind that Griffiths Park had some interior renovations done this past year, so we were only assessing the building envelope and exterior of the building. So that's why that's a little low. This is just kind of showing where the money goes in over the 20-year period of time. Generally, it's mostly always going to architectural elements. That's always the bigger piece of the pie. The items of mechanical, electrical are you see here in the second term of 6 to 10 years is a larger chunk here for mechanical. That's kind of dealing with life cycle items that are coming up for replacement. So there's a bigger chunk there. But generally, this is usually the spread that we see with electrical and mechanical tend to be pretty close. Very rarely is there a lot of structural. It's usually mostly architectural items that come up in these reports. Again, the review here is looking at capital needs for these buildings, each 5 buildings, and then also looking at what it would cost to replace the building in today's dollars. So you can kind of see that there's quite a bit reinvestment if you let the buildings kind of fall into disrepair and have to get replaced. Just a review, we give everything what we call a facility condition index. This is something that actually sorry about that. The was developed by the U.S. military, actually, is where this came from way back when. But it's kind of like a common denominator amongst different governments, that they have kind of a kind of a way that they can measure buildings with each other in a portfolio and then against other portfolios that, say, another municipality may have. Generally, things are good when they're less than 5% has to get invested. Critical when the reinvestment or the FCI score rather is over 30%. So most of the buildings are in that fair to poor range. It always strikes everybody sometimes, why we have so much in the poor range, but that generally happens over time when buildings age. It kind of does tend to slide into that zone, but it can still operate well in that poor category. So it's not necessarily a horrendously bad thing, but it's something that you don't want it to go past the 30%. So when we looked at these 5 buildings, this is kind of an outlook that assumes that you're not putting any capital funding in for the next 20 years. So initially, these buildings are starting here on the left. The Griffiths Park starts at a rating of 7.16, and then it only goes to 8.52. And again, that's mostly because most of the interior components have been taken care of already. The Civic Center was one of those buildings that if you didn't spend any money in the next 20 years, it would fall into the critical condition. Some of the other ones kind of tend to stay within the poor. And in one case, the Galloway Museum, it goes from good all the way down to poor. So these percentage ratings start to increase over here in the end. that high 20s, high to mid 20s there is something that you don't want to have that get too high up in your long-term review. So again, this is assuming that you're not spending any money. This is what would happen to these buildings. Some people find this graph a little easier to read. Again, it's the same increments of time, the top bar being the 5-year, the next blue being the 10, and the dark blue being the 20-year period of time. So again, you can kind of see the Civic Center is one that has, if left to go unfunded, it'll really escalate pretty quickly. The same true for the Science Museum and the Works Building as well. And then we always gave things a priority rating in the next 5 years. A being more the immediate type items that have to happen, like I said, in the next 60 to 90 days. B being a medium level priority, which is years 1 through 3. And then C being years 4 to 5. So items that are in the C category, you can, when you get to year 5, see how they're maintaining, how they're doing. You can elect to roll those items into the next 5-year period if you wish. So, just keep in mind that those liabilities then carry forward as well. So this is just kind of a breakdown of each building as far as the categories. Not surprisingly, most of them fall in that B category. There's only a few in C at Griffith Park, and you can kind of see some of the items that are in here. It's things like doors, windows, things like that. So again, these are the year that we were targeting for them to be replaced, but some are more critical than others. Generally, the building envelope is one of the biggest critical items that you have, because if you let moisture and weather into the building, then the building can start to slowly deteriorate over time. So that escalates it. So if the roof fails, you never really want to put that off too much. Items that are here in the C are the most likely candidates that could get deferred again for a future period of 5 years. So this is just kind of a summary of all the different pieces of ones that went into each building. These are all broken out in the reports in more detail, but it kind of gives you an idea of some of the line items. But you can see over here, there's Civic Center, there's floor finishes, carpeting, so there's a big chunk of money there. Vinyl tile, window coverings. These are things that are kind of running in the life cycle, but generally the aesthetics of that stuff may still be fine. They still might operate okay if we defer it. So that's really kind of a judgment call on the town. Is the fire hall as well. That had a little bit more in the C category than some of the other buildings. And the station, again, had very few in the C category. Most of them were in the B. So the next 3 years. Public Works has, again, your biggest investments. Quite a few items on the immediate category here. There's a couple of things that are, pretty large ticket items, like the fire safety inspection for the partitions. And then there's some exterior work, gravel, sidewalks, things like that. And then over here on the right, there's all of your electrical equipment is kind of getting to the end of its life cycle. So that's kind of why there's a lot of stuff that happens in here. So that's more of that same public works. That's the longest list out of all of them based on the amount. So how do you look at all this? The 5-year plan is always the most actionable, the most realistic. We always recommend that you reevaluate a building every 5 years on a cycle, because there's going to be some things that may have stayed pretty static that you could say very easily we could defer it to the next 5 years. But more importantly, there might be some new items that come up that might actually have a higher concern or priority in the building. You got a major storm that hit the building, the roof got further deteriorated, some new cracks in the exterior wall, things like that, for instance, could have occurred within that 5-year period, and you may elect to bump some of the ones down the road a little bit while other ones have to get added. And then you always have to keep in mind, the risk factor to the operations of the building. So if the roof was to fail, the heating system of the building was to fail, that's when closure of the building could happen. You know, the vinyl floor, it might look a little worn, but you probably could push that down the road a little bit, you know, in priority and timeline if you have to kind of balance your budgets and work with the funds that you have available. So here's an example of the public works building, because again, that's your highest capital needs. And again, this chart kind of represents no investment for the next 20 years. So you're going to get into that 25.58 percentile if you make no capital investments in the next 20 years. And then at the end of the fourth year, I'm sorry, the end of the fifth year rather, you're already at the 14.31. So you're kind of halfway um, to the bigger number, even at the end of year 5. So how do you kind of deal with this? The way that we kind of always try to illustrate is that there's a couple of funding scenarios. You know, you have 100% funding, 75, 50, and 25%. After 5 years, that isn't going to take your building out of poor, but it is going to keep the escalation of the percentage going up too significantly. So the more investment that you put in, the higher, the lower the factor is at the end of that period of time. So in other words, at the end of the 5-year cycle, if you did the 100%, you can take that number all the way down to 17.95. If you do nothing, it's up here again at the 27, and then the 50 and 75 are here are kind of the middle zones. So there are some things you can do. This is a very dynamic thing. So obviously, if you change the funding, has different results. But you may target certain buildings during a 5-year period that have the most needs, and then kind of adjust this between your portfolio over time. We always like to show this chart because I think it kind of keeps it pretty simple. Generally, the building is always going to you know, the condition is always going to decrease over time. That's just normal. Things age, and the building is never going to be able to get back to that good category. But it's always important to kind of keep on reinvesting so that it's a relatively flat line that you're dealing with. If you let things go too far, you really sink down to a very high condition, and then you have to have a huge reinvestment to get to. And then if you don't do anything again, it kind of slides back down again. So we always encourage everybody as best they can to kind of try to keep this as a relatively shallow slope if they can, because in the long run, that is going to get you a longer life out of your building. These are not to scale comparatively, but it kind of shows the percentages if you did the 5-year at the different funding scenarios. So the 100%, that has the least escalation over those 5 years. And then again, the 25% here showing the most. So again, a relatively flat slope is what we're looking at. Again, keep in mind that the scales here are a little different on each graph. So the next steps, how do you kind of take all this information and go with it? The FCI scores are, you know, a good marker to have. It's a benchmark that's reasonable to, and it lets you compare all the buildings to each other. You might even say, well, how do our buildings compare to St. Albert's buildings, say? If somebody else is willing to share that information, you'll find that probably most municipalities are in the same spot you guys are in. Everybody's got older buildings, challenging funding sources, and it's kind of a little bit of how to, you know, make the most mileage out of the money that you do have to spend. One of the questions also is, does the building still meet the intent of its construction? You know, if it's a rec center, is it still meeting the needs of the community? At the town hall here, you know, is there enough office space? Is there enough space that you can still do the original function of that building? And then again, relative to the age. Generally, we always like to say that a typical building has about an 85-year lifespan. That's kind of on average. Obviously, there's a lot of historic buildings that are well past that. And then sometimes you have like a steel building that might only last 30 years. Those pre-engineered steel buildings are not really meant to last that long. So when you do renovate, it can extend the life of the building. So it's not always the age is like I say about myself, it's only part of the story, right? Uh, the the main thing is that it still functions for what it's built for. But even if you do decide to replace it or renovate it, there's always consideration that you could keep a building on the portfolio and repurpose it for a new use. Maybe there's another need in the town that has a place that needs to go. Those are kinds of considerations that you can have for vacated buildings. Um, does the site allow for any expansions or replacements on it? So a land acquisition is always a consideration. Is there enough room to build a 3,000 square foot addition without taking all the parking away, for instance? Or if you had to build a whole new facility, where would that go? Can it go on that existing site, building on the parking lot or vacant land? Or is there some other place in town you would have to build it? And then how long should we wait for these types of decisions? So um, if you're starting to think about replacing a building, you kind of have to start to think about how long out you want to have that happen. And then you don't want to be putting a whole lot of more money into that building if it's just going to get knocked down in 10 years from now. So you have to kind of do the minimum to keep it going for the additional 10 years and then get the replacement in place. So I kind of went through really quickly, I realized, but I just wanted to leave a lot of time for you guys' questions. I know you heard some of this last time, and maybe you might have questions for me tonight that also relate back to that presentation.
Okay, thank you. I'll open up to council for any questions. And let's see. Mr. Mayor, I believe you're live.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So my question actually is through to administration. So what will be the next steps now that we've received this report? Will this be feeding into our budgetary processes moving forward?
Through the chair to Mayor Zahara. Well, currently we're looking at the low-hanging fruit, the stuff he's mentioned, the item A's. The bigger items we'll have to defer till next year or kind of make our own 5-year plan for completing the work. A lot of the items they're not cheap, and I think coming up with a good plan would help us out in the future.
Okay, let's see if I can. Councillor Moore. Oh, hang on one second. Jerry? Oh, sorry, Christine, I missed you. I didn't see red light on.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to supplement. Absolutely, we're looking at the low-hanging fruit, but also as a part of our process for capital planning. It all, now, understanding that we have data now with regards to our facilities. It's not just infrastructure that we're looking at below the ground, above the ground, but it's also our facilities all get pulled into that pool, and it's determining priorities and how much can be done in each year, and putting that forward in a plan that council can approve and we can work towards.
Okay, Councillor Moore, you should be live.
Thank you. Through the chair to whoever could answer this question, I noticed in a lot of the building descriptions was asbestos, and I just wanted to know where we stand on that, and if that's immediate removal and part of Plan A, and just what that means for most of the buildings, especially the ones that people are working in right now.
Okay, whoever can answer that.
Through the chair to Councillor Moore. Currently, asbestos, it's safe as long as it's not disturbed. So, it's going to have to be the same kind of plan of attack with asbestos as with any other part of the building that we look at to replace or repair. So I believe Michael might have a comment on that because he's working with another program with asbestos.
Go ahead, Michael.
Through the chair to Councillor Moore and all of council. Just an update on asbestos. In the fiscal year ended of December 2023, you're going to see in our financial statements a new liability for asset retirement obligations where we're legally obligated to carry a liability for asbestos abatement. We had a report done by WSP back in April of 2023, and that report identified $5.4 million of work that we'll need to do in the coming years, and we have been spending a lot of time on calculating the cost and the number of years in which that'll have to be done over, and that'll be coming forward in a presentation to you with our annual financial statements. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does any other councillors have a question or concern? If not, then Jerry, are you done, or you're open to questions, or or is there more to the report?
I think if there's no more questions, I think we're all good. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Wagstad.
I do have a question for clarity on the methodology for the consultant. It does touch on, and it says barrier-free and accessibility in each of these reports, and it says cursory review. Just wanted to affirm that the financial model did not take into consideration the universal design needs to address accessibility, that those financial models were only on architectural, structural, and mechanical. Is that correct?
We looked at, basically, we looked at a couple of, the major components was the parking at each building, access from the parking lot to the front door, public access within the building and service areas, and then washrooms. So those are the main focus of it.
Okay, go ahead.
And so those financial numbers that we saw for replacement value or inputs, did that take into consideration the financial needs to bring these issues of accessibility up to a modern standard?
Those were basically, we were recommending a study in the buildings that had the most concerns. And then we put in a kind of a value, to carry forward as the budget. So until you do the final study, you won't have the full scope of it. But that was, if there was an elevator being considered, we put that in. If there was ramps or modifications of existing washrooms, that was accounted for.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Taylor, let's see if I can get you up here.
I'm up. I'm good.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, through the chair to all of council and administration, thank you, Mr. Wagstaff, for bringing up accessibility. I spoke about this briefly kind of 2 weeks ago about attacking sort of from a financial point of view, certainly grants that hopefully were available. There's lots of accessibility grants, and I think hopefully we can take that in consideration when we look at our budgetary process, especially certainly when I look at Griffiths Park. If that's going to be a facility where we want members of the community to go to, we have to make sure it's accessible. And at our last Alberta Municipalities Conference, we had a great presentation from I can't remember her name, certainly disabled, and she spoke about all sorts of accessibilities, whether it be wheelchair access or for the visually impaired, for the hearing impaired, and bringing our facilities, especially the ones where members of the public will be going to. And that should be earmarked and looked at within a budgetary process and looked at within grants, and how we could attack that. And Griffiths Park and soon to be our multiplex will have to meet all those needs as well. So thank you, Mr. Wagstaff, for bringing that up, and that's something we're gonna have to be looking at certainly in the future.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Taylor. Any more questions or concerns from anyone? If not, then thank you very much, and we will move on. No protected serve information. We're moving on to questions from media, public, or of the meeting. Steve, do we have anyone online? I think it's just Joanne. Do you have any questions for us? Okay, then thank you. Then I'm going to call for the motion to go in camera. Councillor Bevins, I think you're live. Hang on. There, you're live.
That the meeting move into closed session pursuant to Section 24 of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act.
Okay, thank you very much. All in favor? Thank you.